because now it's in safe mode.
Chris.
And please, everyone, welcome Kate Towsey to the stage.
So, clicker is here. Great. There was one researcher in the audience. Is that true? There you are. And the rest, everybody who does research? I didn't get to see all the hands. Okay, so lots of, with all respect, I call that cohort PWDRs. It's become a little well known on Twitter. People who do research. And Steve's picked up on that, Steve Portugal. And I've said to him, you have to have the W in PWDR has to be a small w because it's, what? No. What was it? Yeah, so it had to be a small w. And then I thought back and I thought, that's totally not a headline case. Anyway. And it's a really interesting space for me in terms of research operations because it really shifts. As you'll see, I'm going to take you through a bunch of stuff tonight. And if you've never heard of ResearchOps, I hope by the end of the evening you'll have a much better understanding. So on that note, who has heard of research operations? Okay, good. Actually, more people than our researchers. That's kind of good. Mostly because of me, right? And design operations? Okay, about the same. So I work for Atlassian, and today I'm going to talk about the state of research ops. It's more than just theory. I could give you a big blurb about that, but let me first go through the agenda. So what is this thing called research ops? I run a full one-day workshop just on this, and I'm going to condense it into about 3 minutes, I think. We'll look at the rise of research ops. I'll take you through the people leading the way in this new space, a relatively new space. We'll look at the Atlassian Research Ops team, the team that I came to Sydney exactly 1 year ago, actually. 2nd of August was my Australian birthday, to build out this team, and I'll introduce you to them kind of virtually by picture. We'll look at what research ops is not, one of my favorite ranty topics. And then we'll also look at stuff we're grappling with as an emerging discipline for the most part. What are we, as a discipline, kind of battling with along the way? So to start off with, what is research ops? Well, last year I wrote this definition after a whole lot of research and realized about 8 months later that really if I'd been more concise on that day, I would have just had this. Research ops, it provides the roles, the tools, and the processes needed to support researchers in doing their work. In coming to Atlassian, I've learned that it's also there, depending on how the organization and how design and product is structured, it could be there to support designers and product managers who are doing research too, or as I affectionately kind of bundle up as PWDRs. I did a bunch of work last year with around, I guess at the end of the day, it was sort of 1,500 really amazing people who came together across the world, and we came up with this framework, or we came up with a whole lot of data, and a bunch of people did a lot of analysis, and then one weekend when I realized I'd promised this like mammoth thing, I came up with this framework to represent what research ops is. Very hard to absorb if you're sitting in an audience and you've got this huge screen in front of you. Here's a much easier list of all the things that research ops can be handling. It can be everything from research participant recruitment. It's at the top of the list for good reason, everybody's favorite topic in research ops, through to procurement of vendors and tools and things like that. It can include research spaces. A lot of work that we do is around data governance. We collect a lot of stuff about people. Conferences, but things like celebrations and condolences too. Who loves cake? No hands, right? Who loves cake? So this is a thing. Research ops, you can think operations, it's like legalities and kind of rules and stuff, but it's also about celebrating and about cake. So I have someone on my team working on cake ops, and it's become this official kind of team joke. We have thank you gifts for our participants, NDAs, and it says consent forms and behaviors. That's interesting. I wonder what that means. Onboarding new staff, and also things like project management or program management across what is actually happening across the research body. So where did this thing called research ops come from? Who had heard about research ops prior to, say, last year, 2018? I know 1, 2 people. Yeah, it's usually, even in an audience of about 1,000 people, there'll be kind of a couple of hands up. So I feel like research teams are getting bigger. They're getting more complex. Teams are now very often 10 people, whereas 7 years ago we were 1. Lonely researcher hanging out in the corner, kind of doing things on their own. And with that is also, as they become bigger, they're becoming more sophisticated as well. So you have now research leaders and people wanting to have impact and kind of a bunch of stuff that comes along with that. So I've been working in the space for, I guess, since 2013, and I got really lonely. I've been hanging out in London, doing some consulting work in content strategy, in fact, and then Lisa Reichelt said, come and work for me at GDS as a contractor. And I said, what do you want me to do? And so she said, come and build us a library. You're a content strategist, build us a research library. And I thought, okay. Now, if anyone knows anything about research space, who's kind of come across an amazing library in the research space, very few people have, if anyone. When you do dig into library space, and I've got someone doing this research at the moment and speaking to people across the world about libraries in research, and they generally don't work. So I in 2013 came floating in and thought, wow, what a cool kind of thing. I'm going to solve this one. And it's kind of 8 years later and I still haven't solved it. But what I did do while I was there was I was entertaining myself with building a research lab and with putting in communications for the research team, which was around about 40 people at the time, looking at things like data governance. And I made very, very good friends with information security and became an expert in DPA and then later GDPR, and found myself in the space doing these what I called at that time infrastructure and support type things. And I thought, wow, it doesn't seem to be anyone else working on this kind of stuff along with me. And every now and again, someone would get in touch with me and ask about lab work or about information security. And people from pretty big companies, Etsy or government in the US, 18F and so on and so forth. And I kept having the same, over about 3 years, I kept having these same conversations over and over again. And next thing it was 5 years later, and now I was actually pretty well known for researching researchers and having a lot of information about how researchers think about stuff. So eventually, after many of these conversations, one day I was just sitting innocently and had this kind of inspiration. I thought, well, maybe I'll start a Slack, because it saves a lot of flights flying off to America where most of these people are to have a chat. And we can gather in the Slack, and there'll be kind of like 5 of us and a virtual case of beer in the corner, and we can collaborate on what does this thing that might, this research infrastructure support whatever thing, what it means to us. So I sent out this tweet, and it wasn't very much long later, maybe 2 months later, it was about 500 people. And not people just kind of randomly hanging out, but really excited about talking about this thing. And someone said, hey, like it's kind of like operations, like design operations. And I was like, oh, cool, it's like this research ops thing. So as this crowd grew, there was kind of a core bunch of people that gathered around, and I said, well, you know, this is very lovely that we're chatting, and it's so amazing to see that there's 500 other people who care about this stuff. But just chatting to each other is not going to progress us, and I would be terrible in Japan. I know they do lots of tea ceremonies and stuff. I'm like, let's get to business. Like, let's do something with this. So we decided to do a project. It was supposed to be 5 countries, where we called it #WhatIsResearchOps. And we wanted to speak to our primary customers, researchers, and do some more research about researchers by researchers, very meta, to find out what would a researcher need from something called research operations. I figured I had a fairly good idea, but that's what every person says about something until you start researching. So we started out with 5 countries, as I said, and before long, we ended up with countries across the world getting involved, like thanks to Twitter and Medium and kind of general enthusiasm and I guess just right timing. And people from Japan and Russia all got involved in this project called What is ResearchOps? In the end of the day, it involved 34 cities and 17 countries around the world. Around about 1,500 people took part. We did workshops called the What is ResearchOps workshops, if you hadn't kind of guessed that one. And it was really interesting to understand researchers en masse, researchers' challenges, and also their triumphs and the things that they felt were working really well for them. And then we ran a survey as well, which a couple of people spent an extraordinary amount of time diving through the data to try and analyze what we'd actually learned. And this is what was spat out on the other side, this framework. And it's incredibly rewarding going into offices and seeing this on the wall. And at some point I printed it up and put it on my wall too, because I felt like I should at least represent. And what it shows is that list basically, and how all these things connect to one another. This is online. Everything that we did is part of that community. It's called the ResearchOps community, and now it's 2,500 people and growing on Slack. Everything is open source. So if you, actually I discovered the other day, if you search ResearchOps framework, Kate Towsey, or even maybe just ResearchOps framework, this comes up, which is pretty cool. Thanks, Google. So that was 2018, and it felt like this rise of research operations. But actually what I learned through that whole experience was that the community that came out of that was a very strong community of people, mostly researchers, interested in being more efficient, interested in operationalizing. But the problem is that if you had the time to be more organized, you would have been more organized already. You don't necessarily, I make this blanket statement fairly confidently, there is very little time as a researcher to become in an operations way where you've got systems in place that make things repeatable. There's very little time to set those up and design those and then maintain them, because as we all know, you don't build a system and then just walk away from it, and operations is the same. So I discovered through that there is a kind of cohort of people, researchers and designers and PMs, who are interested in becoming more systematized and organized, particularly with research participant recruitment and cake, and getting that right, but don't have the time to really do it. And then there's a bunch of people in the world who have actually been doing this role for some time and had just been so busy, head down, doing the role that hadn't really stuck their head up to speak to one another until this massive movement came along and kind of the waves kicked up everybody at the bottom of the ocean. And now we're really good friends and spend a lot of time together as a kind of a small community of people. So here is, actually, I'm going to go back just to share something with you. On the side, I guess about 6 months ago now, I stepped away from leading the ResearchOps community, mostly because it got so big and it gets bigger every day. And one of my big lessons was that communities are freaking hard work. They're really hard work. People can actually be quite demanding, which is quite surprising. You're offering a service, and there's a lot of people even wanting to help. And yeah, like lots of people wanting to get involved and and that takes a huge amount of management. And then it dawned on me a few weeks ago, because Atlassian's about 4,500 people and growing, that when you've got a community of kind of 2,503, that's like an Atlassian size. And it's very easy to get in a position where you feel like you've got to be running this community for everybody, and it becomes like an unpaid work, like job. And I realized I couldn't move country, build a ResearchOps team at Atlassian, like have a life and be sane, and run this massive community. And huge hats off to Bridget Metzler, who is actually Australian. She was part of our Australian kind of the board that was leading the ResearchOps community, which, just as a total aside, was called the cheese board, because we're the big cheeses, and it was the cheese board. So she's actually taken over leading the community, and I still am boggled at how she manages to fit that in with family and work and everything. It's a huge thing. So I stepped away from that, but I was still in this place where I had my original itch, which was I'm kind of like lonely in the space where I am, and now I'm like building a ResearchOps team in a strange country in this company, and I've been consulting for 10, 12 years. And I wonder who else is out there that's doing a similar thing. And it turns out there's a bunch of people out there. And so about a year ago, I realized that like as a ResearchOps manager, or any manager really, you kind of need cheerleaders and chums who understand and can back you up and also give you some like under-the-counter like advice, particularly like around vendors. So I started this thing called the Cha-Cha Club, which stands for cheerleaders and chums. And it's actually now it's like totally opposite to the ResearchOps community, which I was totally like, it's open for everybody and all come, and everybody did. And then I was like, oh my God, too many. But Cha-Cha Club is invite only, and it's only for research operations managers. So I've kept it very, very small. There's no Slack. I send out a doodle every like 4 or 5 weeks whenever like the urge takes me. And we meet on Zoom for an hour chat that's not recorded, so we can share openly, and then we go away, and that's that. And sometimes someone might email, but like I've just cut it down to like the most basic thing. And it is, a lot of the people I'll go through now are in the Cha-Cha Club. And so what's been fascinating about starting that, and we're now kind of in our 4th month, is kind of we realize we've got kind of a power because we often use the same vendors, like survey vendors and things like that. And so we will kind of share who's doing what with what vendors and how much we're paying and who's promised who. And when I've been talking to vendors and dealing with them, I say, well, I kind of have this club and it's got lots of really big companies in it. and we share everything that's going on, and we realized that we can actually, across our companies, become quite powerful. So that's my new interest in kind of powerful communities. Anyway, so here are members of the Cha-Cha Club, and they've all given me permission to share the data that's here. So Airbnb has a research operations team. It's 9 people, and in fact, I think it's coming up to 11 people now. It's growing. They've been going for 2 years, so well kind of before the rise of research operations last year. And Tim Toy leads that team, and he says it's challenging scaling a team with limited resources to provide comprehensive coverage to a fast-growing and fast-paced research function. And the scaling word comes up a lot. We're like mini startups in an organization, like a lot of teams are, but we're also we're pretty much a new practice. So we're trying to, for ourselves, figure out how do we scale? Who do we hire? There are no research ops experts. And when someone does say they're an expert, I'm like, really? You must be a unicorn. Because there's very few people who are experts in research ops. So we've got all these kinds of things we're trying to figure out, and scaling is one of them. We've got Saskia at Deliveroo in London, and she is now 3 people, and they're a year old, that team. She's in fact working with Charlotte Clancy, who worked with Lisa and I at the Government Digital Service. And so she's lucky in that Charlotte knows from having worked with me what a difference research operations can make. And so she's got buy-in from day one. And so she's not needing to go into her organization and sell research operations in. But she says research ops allows me to indulge my geeky planning, spreadsheety side, as well as my people-loving, supportive side. It's the best of both worlds, and it's incredibly fulfilling. And one of the few positive quotes actually here. But it really shows the service side of operations people, and actually something that Melanie said in her talk about like saying no and then the reason for it is something that I'm needing to teach my team, because I'm pretty good at it, is how to say no, because you hire people who want to help. They like have the disease to please, and that's a wonderful thing, but they're just like, yes, yes, of course, I'd love to help you. And so a lot of my work is trying to quell that side just a little bit so we can be real. There's so much to do so we can be realistic. We've got Booking.com in Amsterdam, and they've been around for 6 years, which is quite amazing, long before the rise of research ops, or what is research ops. And they've got 10 people on the team, and I think they've just consolidated some of the team as well. And Carrie Peters, I think she's the head of user research there and manages that team. And she says, the spark behind scaling research operations is recognizing and communicating the need as soon as possible, so get in early. The longer you take to do that, the harder it becomes to amplify the value of your research investment. Saskia from Deliveroo actually gave a really nice talk on this on Rosenfeld Media, the design ops community, talking about how she started with 1 person and now she's grown to 3. But she started when the team was really small, and I'm going to talk a bit more about numbers later and when to get in someone. It's earlier than you would think. Here's a prime example. Spotify New York have got 1 person. Now, that was Lucy Walsh, but Lucy has now gone back to doing research, which is every research operation manager's worst nightmare. My team attended, as part of our research on-site, a research workshop recently. I was like, oh my God, please don't love it, because they all go back to doing research or have aspirations for research. It's kind of sad for me. Anyway, so she says the potential scope of research ops is vast, and therefore requires working closely with the team to understand their needs and to develop and communicate a plan of attack that is both realistic to existing ops' bandwidth and flexible enough to evolve with the needs of an organization. So again, very much around scaling and not over-promising, and again, wrapping in that thing of the disease to please and wanting to do everything. And again, so finally here we've got Atlassian in Sydney. We're 6 people, and 1 did go back to research. And so we're 5 people now, and we've been around for 2 years. It was really 1 person prior to me being around, so it was 1 person doing a lot of admin. It's a help, but it doesn't get you into what I would call the operations space. It just helps the team be more organized in a particular area. And I've said here, I like to quote myself, don't underestimate the resources you need to get the job done. A huge lesson for me last year in kind of building out even just research recruitment. It takes an enormous amount to recruit people. And so what I learned was that 1 person can possibly handle around 15 projects a month. They can probably bring in about 100 participants in a month. It takes a lot to recruit. And I was like, here's 2 people, we'll just recruit for the whole of Atlassian. I did actually say that, and it didn't work. So we're scaling back now. That's not a comprehensive list. I now know since Cha-Cha Club's growing. There's Microsoft. They've had a team in there for 20 years. It's a very long time. Even HMRC and the UK government have got a team. So there's Salesforce, what do they call Thumbtack? There's like a lot of people coming in, and more people getting in touch with me who are starting to hire and build teams out. Very quickly, because I know I'm on time here. So this is the Atlassian ResearchOps team. Just to give you an idea of how we're structured, we have me as the manager, a program manager coming in who I'd work very closely with. Lisa Raycolt heads research, and she's really setting the strategy. And her strategy is really guiding everything that I do. There are fundamental things I can put in that are almost strategy agnostic, but the moment that Lisa shifts strategy, my operations are shifting strategy. If she says, okay guys, this lab thing or usability testing or whatever is like out, we're now gonna run into the field, my consent forms change. I'm now not building research spaces in the building, I'm suddenly getting lab field kits together. I'm now like, have to get in a travel service for them because they're going to be booking flights all over the place, and that becomes their administration instead of meeting room bookings and things like that. So I'm always needing to work closely with head. Then I've got someone working on research recruitment, a couple of people actually, both on the service design side of it, making the experience nice for participants and for researchers, and actually doing some research recruitment as well. I've got someone who works only on research technology and on our stack, so looking at our big survey tools and moving data across from one place to the other and how we do that compliantly and how we send out huge surveys and hats and blah, blah, blah. A ton of work just in working out our quantitative research stack and all our governance that sits not just around that, but around every other tool that we use. I've got someone working full-time on building us that library, and this time we're going to crack it 8 years later. So there's some really interesting stuff we're looking at. How do we use Confluence in a way that makes it a useful research library? We love to set ourselves a challenge. And then I would love to get in at some point. The person I lost was an amazing event coordinator and communicator, someone who can organize internal events, external events, and look after our blogging internally and externally to make sure that the research we're doing has impact. So here's that really big list again that you saw earlier. It's really the framework out in words. And with one person, you can probably look after kind of this, one or two people. Research participant recruitment is a very big job. So in fact, when it was just Sarit, who runs research recruitment now, when it was just her and I, we'd look after this, and cake ops, celebrations and condolences, and vendors and incentives, thank you gifts and things. That was pretty much all we could do as two people. It takes a lot of work. Now that we're 5 people, we can handle something more like this, and we've got a bunch of work happening. And with another person or two, I can start to really fill that out, but I'd need a team of like 6 or 7 people to really start to make that happen. There's something that is very often left off the list and is vitally important, and that is ops service design. I've realized that you can't just have someone come in and do research recruitment. Someone's got to be full-time, which is now Sarit's job, working on designing those services. It's a service that many people, if PWDRs are being included in that equation, it can be, like for us, 350 customers in an organization. And if you're me, you set up a service desk and go, everybody will recruit participants for you. It doesn't work. So it's really important. One of your first things to do is not expect administration or support as that first research ops person comes in, but to expect them to do the service design. And more recently, I've been thinking about that as clearing the pathways. So my first kind of notion of it was like, don't worry about picking up anything, we'll carry it for you and we'll put it down there. Or don't even open the car door, we'll open it for you and we'll drive you to your place. You know, just like self-service, butler service. And then I got really smart after about a year and realized that you're driving your own car, but I will make an Uber app available to you. You know? So our work right now, we've pulled right back and we talk about clearing the pathway so that researchers can walk the path. So one of the things I've been really impressed with in Australia is when you go out into the bush, there's like amazing, I come from Africa originally, right? There's like beautiful pathways, wooden planks, and like it's like not even really walking in the bush, it's like pathways. And I think of that for research operations. If we can create like Australian style, like camping path, like you know what I'm talking about, the national parks pathways, like that's what we want. Not like Africa, we've got like a machete and you're like trying to figure out everything all the time. So my kind of notion has really shifted. Where previously I'd be like, get in, you know, those old, where you put people in those like things that you carry them. That was my notion a year ago. So what ResearchOps is not, this is where I usually get ranty. Tonight I'm feeling quite chilled. So it is not research leadership. As I said, I run like a one-day workshop, and sometimes for the entire morning, it's just reiterating that it is not research leadership. Lisa is in charge of research leadership. She comes up with a strategy. She knows whether we're going to be doing ethnography, or whether we're going to be doing this, or whether we're going to be like embedded or not embedded, or all of those leadership problems are her job. And my job is to help bring those things to life, to respond to those things and go, and I've done this a couple of times in the last year, be like, oh, okay, well, if we're going to do it that way, then I need to do X, Y, Z to make sure that the infrastructure is there to support that strategy. Just going back to that, actually, it's really good because the whole ResearchOps conversation has brought people together to talk about leadership in research, which is a long ago needed conversation. And I know there are many people who are now getting together and talking about, in this growing industry, what does it mean to be a research leader and what skills do you need? Because you're now suddenly a great researcher who's managing people and needing to be a strategic thinker. It is not research strategy, as mentioned. This is Lisa's job to come up with this, not this Lisa, another Lisa. It is not researchers being more organized. I love that researchers or designers or PMs can become more organized. You can learn a lot from research operations, and I hope there's more time for us to keep sharing with you. We're very busy as a discipline kind of trying to do the work. But you just, like, you've seen the list. There's just no ways that a researcher can, like, on the side, organize everything. It's just not possible. It cannot be done by one person. One person can do a little bit of admin, might get a little service done here and there, and that's it. It's very, very contained what one person can do. So here's the stuff that we're grappling with as a new discipline. As I said, Cha-Cha Club's like 30 people now, and I'm sure there's people somewhere hidden under rocks that we somehow haven't managed to reach, and I hope that they'll come out soon. It's wildly underestimated. I wildly underestimated, and I felt like I was pretty well educated in this space. It's proving your worth with very little resource. Like, we're in startup territory. We need to kind of show big bang for very little buck when we get in so that we can get more headcount and kind of grow what we can deliver. And the interesting thing about that is, like, how do you, and I've been thinking about this, how do you show your worth but not too much so you don't get more? I don't know if anyone else has thought about that. Because if you fill a space that is a problem and you're working extra to fill the space, unless you've come up with some amazing, efficient way to fulfill it, then the space is filled and no one feels the pain, and then you don't get the resource to sort it out. So always thinking about, how do I make the space known and not fill it? So confusion as to what ops is and is not. This is even somewhat like, it's taken time to teach my team what we're doing, and still sometimes I feel like, why do we not have this yet? Do I need billboards or something? What am I saying? It's not getting through. But it is getting there, and it's still, like I said, I run an entire day workshop basically on what is it. And by the end of the day, it really isn't understanding, it's not strategy, it's not these things. It's heavily reliant on clear leadership. It's very, very discomforting because strategy and research can change like this, and it's like, oh, well, we're doing ethnographic. Okay, we're not. And we're doing this. And I'm going like, I've got vendors, 2-year contracts with vendors. I've got money with those vendors. I've got rooms built with equipment in them. This is stuff that takes years, that can take years to put together. And if a strategy just changes, philosophically for a researcher, you can shift, but I can't. And so I need very kind of clear guidance, and then I can adjust certain things on the way. It's reliant on very close collaboration with the organization. I'm usually best friends with security, with legal, with procurement, with estates. I always want rooms, things like that. These are the opportunities. We're building a practice from scratch, so we can make it up. And we can also make it up together. And that's a really, really interesting opportunity. A small community means we can get close and have impact, which we do. And we're exploring working with other ops in the organization. So there's been DevOps around for a long, long time, and Design Ops has been around for a little longer than us. And really from research to design to development, that's one operation. So although I'm kind of seen as someone that's really built up this discipline, although that's sort of a lie, as you've seen, because it's been around before, I'm like the first person to say, let's blow up all the different ops and just have ops in tech. Like, we don't need all these different ops. We just ops has happened in factories forever, like since Henry Ford and probably before. But for now, it's kind of helpful to have these distinct disciplines. And we centralize the research effort and costs. Now, this is really interesting. I learned this last year when we were like, we'll recruit researchers, participants for everybody. And it's like, holy shit, there's lots of people doing research in this organization. It costs a lot of money too. And so it's really interesting when the research is sort of hidden across locations and across teams. When you start to offer these services and centralize the cost, you realize just how much research is going on that possibly doesn't need to happen. To your point, you don't need 1 million discoveries to discover something. And you realize how expensive it is. And it's very easy for people to be like, oh, we'll just do some research. But 5 participants costs around about $2,500 US every single time, at least. And when you start to when people are coming in and going, we've just done research with 20 people every 2 weeks, that's $10,000 every time. When you start to centralize that cost, executives do start to notice. They're like, wow, you're spending like $1 million a year on this thing, and where's the value for that? And that's got advantages in that if you do have a problem of too much research going on, which is a problem these days, actually, you've got a way to start to measure that down and say, what do we have to do? So in conclusion, really, help your researchers focus on the research, or help your designers and PMs focus on their work. What we've seen is 1 ops per 5 people, and it's really good to start out. As soon as you get 5 researchers, get your 1 ops person in and start early, which is really Saskia from Deliveroo and even Carrie Peters from Booking.com saying, like, start early, get in early. And I found that I've got now a team of 5 for around about 20 researchers, and we're just about on track. And Lisa's promised me that every time the team grows by 5, I get like another ops person by default, which I will hold her to. So that's it. Stay connected with me. I'm on Twitter. It's basically my name everywhere. I do a lot of curation work for Rosenfeld Media. We do VCs every month. So there's a lot of really good people from the Cha-Cha Club basically speaking on those calls. There's the ResearchOps community, a lot of researchers and ResearchOps people. And I do office hours sometime as well if you are actually looking at setting up a ResearchOps function in your organization. Happy to chat.
Thanks, Kate. There was such a huge queue of people over here. We've got time for a few questions. So let's see those hands up quickly. Bingo.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Given research is so resource intensive, do you have any advice for organizations that don't necessarily have the resourcing for that kind of cadence? Maybe there's opportunities for economies of scale across organizations, for example. Just wondering if you've any advice in the area.
Yeah, when you say cadence, do you mean sprinting or like?
Not necessarily having the cadence do research every 2 weeks, for example, but maybe research much more ad hoc.
Yeah, so one of the things that I always get told is I'm very direct. That is research strategy. It's not a decision that I'd be making or claim to have any expertise in. If Lisa Rakell was saying to me we're going to go into a cadence or cyclical type research, then I would be saying, like at the moment I might be saying, well, then I may need to make sure that we've got research recruitment set up in a way that supports a cadence. But what you're really talking about there is research strategy. How researchers do their research is always the decision of the head of research or the research leader. My job is not to make those decisions, but to understand how, what are the infrastructure and the tools and the things that need to be in place to help that come to life. Does that not answer your question?
You had one, but I'm going to give you one.
Do you think that research ops is something that has to be done inside the company, or could be a business model, especially in the beginning of that new field, that could support different companies?
Yeah, very interesting. I have been thinking about this actually. I'm under visa here, but I'm like a born entrepreneur. It is very hard work for me not to be starting companies at the moment. So my poor boyfriend, like once a week, hears about some new idea, and that is one of them. I think that there is huge scope for people who are really experienced in the space. And as you've asked the question, I kind of look at the Cha-Cha Club and I go, there's kind of an agency here because I've got the very, very most experienced research ops people in the world in this club. And I wonder if we ever got together and created a research ops agency. The same thing for design ops. There's a lot of design ops specialists in the world, and as we develop our skills and our understanding, I think there is scope for that.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you for presenting. I just had a question about whether you could share any secrets to using Confluence as a research library. You hinted at it, but...
Actually, it's kind of interesting because there is, I consider myself kind of a lucky person. Serendipity happens for me, which is great. So I arrived at Atlassian pretty much a year ago. It was a year on Wednesday. And I walked in the door and kind of obviously knew a little bit about the tools. And one of the first things I knew I needed to do was somehow figure out how to deliver a library for Atlassian and try and use Confluence for it. And I happened to come across a talk by someone at Huddle who had used Confluence, and she gave this like 20-minute demo of using Confluence as a research library. And I thought, oh my God, this is like angels, like universe colliding and stuff. Amazing, I've basically been given like the key to the whole world. And then it all turned out to be way more difficult because it is Confluence. And the reason for that is that we're on cloud because we're cloud forward, and the deployment they're using, this company, is server, and the apps that you have on server you don't get in cloud, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. So we couldn't do the same thing. But that's a very long and hopefully entertaining answer to your question. No, not yet. But Georgie Bottomley, one of our senior researchers who's joined my team, is working full-time at the moment on doing a discovery on research libraries and how people think about libraries and taxonomy, and kind of she's doing an incredible job. And I hope that within another quarter, like say 4 or 5 months, we're going to have an MVP out using Confluence. And maybe then, Joe, I can come back, but or just kind of speak with anyone who's interested.
Hi, you mentioned that you've lost a person to research, they've gone back to research, and that seems to happen. Is there a reason for that? And once you've lost them to research, is there any opportunity to claw them back and to bring them back to the right side?
It's a really great question, and the right side, I like that. It's a great question, and I think what's really been there is that I know when I've hired in, people have come into the space and they've been like, well, I'm like an admin person, and you hire, and that's all they're going to do forever. That's their notion. Like, well, I just do some admin and I just do some recruitment, or I work in HR, and that's kind of my lot. And I'm like, no, there's like a global movement around this, and we can like build career paths, and like people who are now on my team, we've gone to conferences together, and they can see that there's an entire like community around this, and companies are building this up, and like if they work and stick with it, they could become like a ResearchOps or operations manager, and possibly work on when we blow up all the ops, they could just become an ops manager. They could have actually quite a senior role in a company with that experience. So I think what's been happening is people don't see the potential of operations because it's not been shown to them. And that industry and a career ladder hasn't existed for them. And so they do see a career path of some sort in research, and they see an importance around it, and they'll move over into that. I'm hoping that changes when we really start to build out that the work that we do is it's high impact, it's extremely important, and you can become very senior. I mean, I'm senior management in Atlassian, and so I hope in some ways that I'm kind of showing that you don't kind of just sit down somewhere in the dungeon doing some admin.
Hi, Kate. Thanks for the talk. I was just wondering, I'm a person who does research. I'm also not the most organized person. But I'm just wondering, from your experience, and as you're trying to maintain that boundary, let people understand what happens when design ops isn't there, what do people like me do that bug your team the most?
Well, where to start? I think it's kind of an easy question and a tough question, because I'm like, oh, do I say that or do I not say that? Let me be open. I think the biggest thing, particularly with research recruitment, is, and I speak about Atlassians openly, because we're an open company, no bullshit. That's one of our values. So I'm going to live that one right now. When an Atlassian wants to do something, an Atlassian wants to do something, and just about nothing is going to stop them. And so we'd often have someone coming through wanting to recruit certain participants, and it'd be like, I need 20 participants. And you're thinking, why do you need 20? Start with 5. Like, that's more than enough data. Learn from that, and then you'll probably learn that your discussion guide was all wrong anyway. And then you kind of build on from that. And it just was like hell to get through, and just be like, you do not need 20 people. And then my recruitment team would be like, oh, okay, fine, we'll just get the 20 people. And that's where I've started to actually calculate, well, do you know that that's $10,000? And if you were asking your manager for $10,000, I'm not sure they're going to give that to you for this little project. So I think it's really like leaning into what research skill is in the organization and respecting that. And I feel like I might be preaching to the converted here, but like research is a skill. And it's not like if a researcher came along and said, I'm just going to do design on the side, designers would feel probably like, well, you don't have to learn design overnight, you know. And researchers are saying the same thing to designers. And I know that I speak for probably every researcher at Atlassian and from in many other companies around the world in saying, like, we wish that designers and PMs would lean into the talent that is the like authentic talent that is in the organization already and hear the advice that's coming through. Because I totally respect that there's sometimes you don't have researchers and there's a need to spend time with customers. But also going back to you get Steve Krug or Jeff Patton or people who are like, just go and spend time with customers. And there are, particularly 8, 9, 10 years ago, there are many companies who are like terrified of spending time with customers and needed that kind of encouragement to go and like at least go and have a chat with them. But I think we've moved on significantly from there, where we're in organizations that want to like sit on a customer's lap all day long and like are contacting them all the time and then don't really know what to do with the data. And they're like, oh, and then the customer's saying 5 times a year, I hate this thing, I hate this thing, I hate this thing. And then a PM phones up and says, hi, I'd love to chat to you. And they're like, ah. So kind of that is all to say that we kind of like, I think we're at a point now where we need to do less research in many places. I don't know everybody's circumstance, but I think we're like doing a lot of research. And we've seen that, like one of the advantages with setting up a research service desk for recruitment is that I now created like a jar of honey. And like every single, like once they found out that there was this like professionalized, like, oh my God, I get to feel super professional doing my research because I just like send in a ticket in Jira Service Desk, of course. And then like research participants are professionally recruited and pitch up on my VC on the allotted day. And it's all just done for me. And then they magically get sent a swag box or an e-gift card. And this is what my team was doing. And that's really wonderful. And people like PMs and designers loved us. But what we learned is like all the tickets coming through was like, my God, we're doing a lot of research. It's really expensive and also pretty crap. Like, we don't need to be doing so much crap research, and we don't even need to be doing so much good research. Like, if it was really good research, we could just do a little bit of it. So I think we've shifted on from those days of everybody needing to do a lot of research all the time. That was my rant for the evening.
No, but how do you
Thanks
really
for
feel?
that.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and don't forget to turn off your mic.